Hello, this Hangout is now live. Good afternoon. We are going to continue the exploration of the ideas of Nassim Nicholas Taleb with regard to minority rule. As you'll recall, the question that I asked you at the end of the last broadcast had to do with does it matter whether an intransigent minority is applying losing tactics or winning tactics? Does it matter which way it's going? So for instance, for libertarians right now, libertarians are a very, very small minority in the United States. And the question is, should they go out and proselytize and join other parties and try to send their message out into the public, or will their message be drowned out by proselytizing? In other words, if too many people join the Libertarian Party who aren't really libertarians, will the Libertarian Party still be a Libertarian Party, or will it turn into any other kind of party? In other words, is it a good idea to be intransigent and remain small, or is it better to be intransigent and also proselytize? And under what circumstances can each strategy work? So if you are a libertarian, I hope I got your attention. If you're not a libertarian, here are some other things that were discussed with regard to misinterpretation of the idea that you can average out your risks. So Nassim Taleb says that as somebody who plays the stock market, the important thing is not whether you win or lose a little each day, but whether you can remain viable to play again the next day. So there are some risks that totally wipe you out, and they're equivalent to death. And so he says that when you're wading across a river and you know that the average depth is 4 feet, that doesn't tell you that that's a good idea to wade across the river, because there might be some point at which the river is very, very high and you won't be able to wade across unless you can swim, I guess. In the same way, I mean, we've got this business with vaccination. In the past, a very, 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 very tiny minority of children who came down with the measles died of it. And those were usually sick children to begin with. Most children who got the measles, you know, it was an inconvenience. It was not fun. Nobody liked it. But they did not emerge scarred from that. Maybe a little scarred, but not very much. Their minds were intact and their bodies were also intact. I am a survival of the measles. I had the measles. I had the mumps. I didn't have rubella. I was vaccinated against rubella. But okay, so when people, you know, young people today, and they think about measles epidemic and 17 people got the measles somewhere, oh, how horrible, death is coming our way. Well, they don't have the same experience with the measles that I had. So could a child die of the measles? Well, yes, of course, if they are immune compromised and they succumb to the measles, they might die of it because there's something wrong with them to begin with. Okay, so now here we have a vaccine that most people are vaccinated and nothing bad seems to happen to them due to the vaccination. They're also not necessarily immune. But yeah, a person who has been vaccinated could still come down with the measles. But for most people, it's not a life-changing event either. just like getting the measles isn't a life-changing event. However, a very small group of people, a small group of children, go in and get their measles vaccinations and come out either dead, well, not dead immediately, but they die of it, or their minds are gone, or their minds are they're not the same. Their life is extremely damaged as a result of having the measles vaccine. So the question is it about the same percentage? But here's what I'm going to say. Even if it were shown to be the case that the percentage of people who would have died of the measles had there been no vaccine, and the percentage of people who would become sick and die of the measles vaccine, or alternatively would become so non-functional as non-functioning autistics as a result of that, even if it were exactly the same percentage, which I don't think it is, but even if it were, it makes a huge difference to the person affected which child would end up dying of the measles, which child would end up damaged by the vaccine. Because if it's your child, then you don't want that to happen. And it's not the same population of children. So they tell us, for instance, that we need herd immunity in order to save the children who would have died if they had simply been exposed to the measles. But the children who are damaged by excessive measles vaccination aren't those children usually. They're the children who would have made it through the measles, who would have made it through the disease and come out perfectly fine. So what we're doing is we are transferring risk. We're redistributing the risk of the measles from the risk being on those who are weak to begin with, and now we're distributing it to people who might have been strong enough to withstand the measles. And this is the kind of thing that happens, for instance, when you send a chimpanzee who was perfectly happy in a human home, and within 5 months she dies, and they say she died of the cold virus. And somebody was lecturing me, well, Bo could die from the cold virus too. Well, guess what? Bo has had the cold virus many, many, many times throughout his childhood. He is now 17 years old. He lived in my household. We got the cold every year. Part of the reason we did is because I had a little girl. She went to school, and every year she would bring back the cold virus to our home just from being exposed to other children at school. And so Bo had the cold virus many, many times, and he did just as well as we did, or better. So the idea that a cold virus will kill a chimpanzee is ridiculous. It depends on the circumstances. But then, so when I was talking about Tiffany, the 15-year-old girl chimpanzee who was sent with her brother to a Florida sanctuary and died within 5 months, and they say it was from the cold, then this person came back and says, well, how can you be so concerned about this one chimpanzee when so many are saved by this sanctuary? Well, okay. If you don't care about a single chimpanzee, if you don't understand what it means to care for an individual, then you have no business making any kind of recommendation, because I only have one chimpanzee, and to lose him would be to lose everything. For Tiffany's dad, who thought he was giving her a better life when he sent her to the sanctuary, this is a tragedy. He's not over it yet. And he's not absolutely sure that she did die of a cold virus. And you can forgive him for being doubtful that that's what killed her, because he knows Tiffany and he raised her. from a baby. So to say that it doesn't matter, that the only thing that matters are the statistics and individuals don't matter. Well, once it is an individual that you care about, then it matters a great deal. Okay, I'm going to now, before we get to our main topic, I'm going to try to share this, and I will do this by looking at my other computer. Going into YouTube in my other account, and here is my live stream, and I am going to share on Twitter. And I am also going to try to share this with the people who are on my other channel. Oh, well, that was the ResearchGate thing. So I obviously didn't. All right. And then I'm going to go on Facebook, and I think I won't bother my friends with this. Or maybe I should anyway. Maybe I should bother them. And then I'm going to go on Facebook, and I think I won't bother my friends with this. Or maybe I should anyway. Maybe I should bother them. But here's what I think I should do. Okay, my friends are going to be really bothered by this now. Okay, yeah, I think I'll show the rest of this later at a different place and location. Okay, so someone had told me that they thought that the way Nassim Taleb thought that we should make sure that the minority, the intransigent minority, doesn't have us all eating halal and so on and so forth, was to put some kind of border around the neighborhood so that the minority would not get to spread so much all the way through. And that sounded awful. It sounded like apartheid, and I didn't like the sound of it. And I was doubtful about it, but I'll tell you what, I found this this link to an interview with Nassim Taleb, and in it he talks about putting a box around that box, and he calls it a circuit breaker. So I want to share with you, and I hope this is not a copyright infringement, and that it is allowed. I want to share with you a little bit what was said in that interview. And I'm just going to the very end of it. So the interview is like 120 minutes. We're just going to go somewhere into the last 20 minutes or so of it. So I'm going to now screen share. And I'm going to look behind, and Here we go. So I am screen sharing, and this is at www.econtalk.org, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, on work, slavery, the minority rule, and skin in the game. This came out August 14th, 2017. It's Nassim Nicholas Taleb talks with Econ Talk host Russ Roberts. And I am at the 124.40 point, and I'm going to play some of it for you. Hopefully, this is within the fair use exception to the copyright rule. Okay?
And it is the Ostrom fisheries argument, you see, is that effectively we have the illusion that the world is some universal place, that a country is a large village, and of course the world is like a large country. That's not how it works. And the best metaphor is the one that my collaborator in complex systems, the physicist Yanir Bar-Yam, brought is in a paper called Good Fences Make Good Neighbors. And in fact, you notice that roommates have different relationships. Okay, they're going to fight a lot more than neighbors, because you'd rather than say floor mates. You have your own room, and someone else has his own. So if we look at how things work, effectively, you have ethical sort of rules that are never quite universal. They're vaguely universal, but there's what Jewish ethics calls thin blood and thick blood. And in the book, I described it as the problem of the Swiss. So for example, when we were traders, when I was a trader, I had there's very complicated and very stiff ethical rules. You can never rip off in the sense, a trader sense. You can never overcharge another trader. You had to be transparent. You had to be upfront. You had to disclose your inventory. You cannot hurt another dealer in that community if you want to continue, because that's how the game worked. But you could conceal your inventory from what we called the Swiss at the time. And the Swiss were those foreigners, you see, clients of Swiss banks, of course. That's how the term, where the term originated from. And with these guys, you could have different rules of ethics. And effectively, if you look at ethical systems, you always have a boundary. Now, of course, we should not have these boundaries.
I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and come back if I can. Okay, so I'm back. And you notice that he said there are always boundaries. Okay, these boundaries are the limits on freedom that my father discusses in Liberty and Justice. Why, how, and for whom. So I'm going to now try to screen share with you something else, and we'll go back and forth between those two. And that way you'll be sure that we're not really just stealing Nassim Taleb's ideas or his voice, but we're really having a discussion here, and it's going to go back and forth. Okay. Okay, Summer, we're going to screen share. Okay. All right. So we are now looking at Liberty and Justice, Why, How, and for Whom. And you can find that at https://hubpages.com politics, Liberty and Justice, Why, How, and for Whom. And that is my father's article that I published there. Here's the abstract. The two theories of liberty, natural rights and utility, are reconciled by the mathematical theory of games. The controversy between utilitarian libertarianism and socialism is resolved by showing that each applies to a particular limiting case. Socialism is correct in the limit of a crowded world. A spacious open world is a necessary precondition for liberty. Several corollaries are produced in the course of the arguments. Liberty is artificial rather than natural. It is a commodity in the sense that it is of value and commands. As a consequence, only a finite amount can be secured, and the domain of application must be limited. Okay. Now, having said that, I'm going to let Nassim Taleb talk some more about this boundary thing.
But it tells you that things work a lot better if you build units, and then you have a fractal relationship between units. So things are organized fractally, of course, and then they have like a fractal relationship. So I have a relationship with my cousin, and my cousin and I, as a unit, say a family, will have a relationship with other families, and then of course the group as a whole will have a relationship with another structure, and so forth. And Ostrom picked it up by noticing that the tragedy of the commons disappears effectively with with scale. I mean, it disappears if you reduce the scale. Yeah, with a reduced scale.
A small enough group can have a set of norms that restrain the problems of free riding on a commons.
Exactly, and I looked at it in Anti-Fragile, actually, initially, with the notion of nonlinearity, that like the sum of some convex function has a different structure, and of course, this is what's behind my ideas on not restricting, but sort of like organizing things along a local level and restricting globalization.
So I disagree with you. Let me lay out why I think that's not.
Okay, so at this point, Nassim Taleb is arguing about limiting globalization. And I don't know whether you really want to hear what Russ Roberts has to say about that, but I thought I would skip and see what we can get out of my father's article in regard to this. Okay, so he starts out, in the course of the article, the above concept of liberty is stripped of its mystique and discussed in quantitative terms borrowed from the mathematical theory of games. While still abstract, these terms are nevertheless much more down to earth than either the language of economics or of morality that is most often applied. We make no judgment on the merits of liberty. Although written in a spirit sympathetic to the libertarian cause, this article offers no argument for liberty. Instead, we discuss the feasibility of obtaining and maintaining it, should it be desired. That is done in terms of cost. It is fairly obvious that liberty is not likely to persist if its cost exceeds the value to its beneficiaries. It goes without saying that liberty cannot prevail if its cost exceeds the resources that its proponents command. We point out that the cost will turn out to be out of bounds unless some limitation is accepted in the domain to which liberty applies. Okay, this is somehow related to the boundaries that Nassim Taleb also talked about. Also, in the limit of a crowded world, the cost tends to infinity. That the more crowded the world, the higher the cost, to the point where it's no longer viable. We can't have liberty if every two people are touching each each other all the time, and there's no space between them. The insights offered here should be of value to libertarians in their quest for personal and commercial freedom. But we believe the article is objective enough to be of use to detached students of liberty and even to critics. In this vein, the apparent contradiction between utilitarian libertarianism and socialism is resolved. It is shown in section 4 that each applies to a different limiting case in terms of the ratio of population to resources. This insight should be helpful in judging the merits of pragmatic social systems. Conversely, it shows that no social order can be maintained without control over population density. So again, this is not the same argument that Taleb with regard to putting a limit on populations, but it is somehow related. I think we're going to have to listen a little bit to what Russ Roberts says so that we can hear the reply by Nassim Taleb. So the first voice you're going to hear now is going to be Russ Roberts.
Applicable. And I'm going to first tell a story I've told before, I'm pretty sure, which is when my children were collecting baseball cards when they were younger, my oldest son would propose some trade that would exploit his younger brothers. And they had to go to the commissioner, that was me, to get that trade approved, because I did not want my son to do what you might call sharp dealing, trying to get the best possible price from his brothers who were less informed than he was. So as a parent in a family, I'm a strong egalitarian. I'm a bit of a socialist. I'm a paternalist. I certainly don't want those rules extended beyond the family. And so in that sense, I agree with you that there are norms and rules that are much more local rather than global. I don't think that has anything to do with globalization as an economic phenomenon, at least the way I understand it. It could have something to do with the way other people understand it. And the reason is
because, let me make a parenthesis here, is that usually people who discuss globalization bundle it with other notions such as universalism.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an important point. Some people think that globalization and universalism are the same thing. Nassim Taleb says it's not the same thing.
That's true. There's a little bit of that.
The application of that sort of continental French, post-French, French-style Enlightenment idea of universal rules. Okay, so the universal, in my opinion, kills a particular. I'm closing parentheses. I'll let you continue.
So here's the way I think about it, and this is very Hayekian. And it's Smithian in the following sense. If I only trade with the people I know, trust, and love, I'm going to be very poor because I'll be unable to exploit economies of scale. And so if I'm a localist, a true localist, meaning only trade with either nice people or people that I have ethnic or religious similarities to, I'm going to be poor. The secret of modern civilization, I would argue, is the opportunity to trade with people who are not like me, who I trust using other mechanisms than my familiarity with them. So when I buy an apple that comes from New Zealand, or I buy something that comes from doesn't have to come from New Zealand, it could come from Illinois, I have no idea who those people are who made the product. I rely on markets to verify the quality and that the price is a decent price. And that's a really great thing. And once I'm outside the people I don't deal with face to face, I think that's the way. In other words, here's the way I would say it. I don't put any emphasis on national borders. So trading with a stranger, whether that stranger is in Illinois or New Zealand, to me is the same thing. And I think that's the way it should be. And the market, that is the emergent mechanisms of trust, will determine whether I should use that product from New Zealand or not, rather than some arbitrary, the New Zealanders don't trade fairly or whatever it is. And the opportunity, anti-globalization, the problem with that is that it allows the politicization of those decisions rather than using the emergent mechanisms of markets to decide whether I should trade with them or not. And that's going to make me very poor.
Okay, so I agree with you. We have the same views on trade in general. Okay, with one or two caveats that I don't think that it should be universal should not be completely unfettered, because you may have overseas very powerful corporations who for some reason got to be very strong and very rich and have huge reach, affect you in Illinois or affect you wherever you're based. And
they can reach into my pocket.
Yeah.
They can reach into my pocket using the power of the government to subsidize their loan to buy airplanes and sell them somewhere. That's wrong.
Yeah. No. I mean, there are a lot of things we agree on. My point is not, I'm of course pro-trade, but my point is that if you're going to put some kind of boundaries for some limited control of things, you need to understand that it's not completely against the rules, because you can say, okay, well, everybody's free within this limit, but to trade between these two borders, you need a little bit of, I won't say regulation, but sort of like we need to agree. I mean, the population inside a certain unit needs to agree on whether they want that corporation to sell goods here or not, you see? So it's not against democracy. It's exactly the way the Swiss do it, where they go to the local population and ask them, hey, what do you guys want?
Yeah, but then I'm worried about that.
Do you want Polish?
Okay, so he's not against democracy. I'm actually against democracy. So maybe I should come out for a minute and stop sharing for a minute, if I can, and return. Okay, here I am. So far, so good. Okay. See, this is an area where it gets a little bit messy. If you believe in democracy, then it's very important what your demographics are. You know, democracy, demographics. So if you actually think that people should vote on whether somebody gets to sell you something or not, then it's tremendously important who the people are who get to vote, what your demographics are. I don't actually believe that people should get to vote about these things at all. But let's go back and see what he has to say. And maybe I can do this without screen sharing by just playing it.
You want a Polish plumber and reduce your plumbing bills by 75%? Yes or no? And if the local population says no, they're not going to allow foreign plumbers from Poland or elsewhere who are considerably, maybe more cosmetically more efficient to come operate. They're going to do their own plumbing. So the Swiss are very good at having marrying sort of like the idea of free trade with some kind of patches, and that's what I'm discussing.
Yeah, those patches, though, of course, are going to come up against the point you made a minute ago about the minority.
Exactly,
the minority, because the Swedish plumbers are all going to be against it. They're not very many of them. Are they going to get the minority rule to impose their will on me, who wants to use the Polish plumber?
No, but they have a good mechanism to prevent. So what happens in countries like Switzerland, countries that have very good governance, and I'm saying governance, not just democracy, is that effectively someone voting for or against a worker will know his or her own interest, you see, as opposed to the interest of a large thing. What happened in the United States is that the reason we have very powerful lobbies in the United States is pretty much because of scaling, because the size of the country is large enough to allow people to lobby and spend the money, because the payoff is monstrous. But if you had, I don't know how many cantons in the United States, then Monsanto would need to have 7,000 or 8,000 lobbyists to do the same job.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
You see the
I agree with that. At that point,
see, this is where so the organization.
Okay, so you see At this point, Taleb is arguing for the states to have more rights than the federal government. And I agree with that. I agree with local rule. And I think it would be wonderful if we could all break down into city-states or, you know, small municipalities that govern themselves, and then they can decide if they want to allow something to be imported that would possibly compete with and destroy the local industry or not. And we certainly don't want that sort of decision to be made globally. But I think this still doesn't take into account what is required in order to defend a city-state. So, as my father said in his article, there is a price to liberty. And so now I would like to go back to screen sharing, and I'm going to screen share the part about the price of liberty. So there's a domain of liberty that can be protected. We can't protect everything and everyone. It has to be a limited domain, and there's a price. And one of the things that we found was that while it was nice to have small native tribes in America, when the bigger scaled entities came, the smaller tribes in the continent of America were not able to maintain the price of their liberty. They weren't able to beat the invaders. And when the agrarian South went up against the industrialized North, the South lost, and we all lost our liberty as a result of it. So there's a price to liberty, and you can't just arbitrarily say what the unit size is going to be without taking that into account. So if I can figure out how to share again, I'm going to screen share, and I'm going to open up my father's article and read you a little bit from there. So let's assume that we already know that liberty has a value. The word natural is used most legitimately as in natural philosophy, meaning science. There are natural laws. These laws are not enacted, but rather discovered by universal enforcement and admit no deviation. Unfortunately, nothing similar applies to rights and liberties. In treading the natural world, man is vulnerable to many disruptive forces. Weather and climate, geological upheaval, or bombardment by space objects can quickly wipe out his livelihood and his person. Also, a whole spectrum of organisms prey on him, from viruses all the way to large predatory mammals. Most prominent among these organisms is man himself, who since prehistory persisted in murdering, robbing, torturing, enslaving, and otherwise exploiting other humans. This has been going on since time immemorial, and no natural process acts to curb it. On the contrary, in the few places and short periods significant rights and liberties, these have always been obtained with great effort and considerable sacrifice, usually requiring armed conflict and loss of life. The inescapable conclusion is that human rights and liberties are artificial rather than natural, an intangible item in the arsenal of implements created by humanity to improve its situation. There is nothing this detract from the value of liberty, nor is it a reason not to prefer liberty itself to its alleged side benefits of increased consumption. A person may be willing to accept a loss in income in order to secure greater personal freedom, and none could prove him wrong. It is strictly a matter of preference, and preference, which is the essence of liberty, needs no justification. Thus, if the lovers of liberty for its own sake part with the rhetoric of natural rights, they retain a valid position. Presenting the love of liberty as a personal preference rather than a God or nature-imposed rule makes it possible to compare and reconcile the two motivations of libertarians, even to combine them. For face it, most people do not subscribe to any principle in an absolute way. The point may be illustrated by a poll recently carried out by the explicitly libertarian publication Liberty. Its editors are, in their own eyes and those of their readers, the graybeards and elders of the libertarian movement. In the poll, they asked their flock to state what they would do in certain contrived situations. The scenarios were designed so that strict adherence to libertarian principles would result in grave harm or risk. The poll showed that the majority of presumably libertarian readers would betray any libertarian principle when the stakes were high enough. What's more, the editors who discussed the results of the poll in Liberty by and large agreed. The police who declared principles, whatever the cost, were put down and called nuts. Certainly, it is legitimate to trade liberty against other considerations. It is also legitimate to compare the desirability of liberty itself to the value of its alleged economic consequences. Granted, it is not trivial. The value of apples and oranges may be compared by their listing on the commodities exchange, but the liberty is not listed. Still, the problem of comparing values of totally different entities has been formally addressed and is largely solved by utility theory, which is a branch of the mathematical theory of games. It must be stated that utility theory, or any other mathematical theory for that matter, cannot tell you the value of liberty relative to that of a 3-topping pizza. No mathematical principle bearing on that question, which is a matter of personal preference. What utility theory does say is that provided your preferences are consistent, a utility function describing them does exist and is practically unique. Such a function can compare the utility of an apple to that of an orange to that of any other object. It can compare the utility of your first dollar to that of your last dollar, million to your second, of any of the above to that of Big Brother watching out for you, to that of being free of such surveillance. Okay. The utility function of different individuals is different, even among advocates of liberty. Some may prefer liberty chiefly for its own sake, while others attach a higher value to the economic benefits. Cases, the love of living both elements to a different extent. So long as the combined utility of liberty and its side effects is high enough, the person in question has an incentive to seek it. All people who attach such high value to liberty, however computed and compounded, have a motive to cooperate in achieving it. The price of liberty. Okay, Summer. Okay. Establish that liberty is of value, it is time to observe that it commands a price. We have already remarked that in the rare cases was to some extent secured, it was gained only by and a considerable cost, usually including loss of life. This last point deserves a brief discussion. The individuals who lost their lives, not get to enjoy the liberty that eventually resulted. What was the trade for that? Heroism may sometimes be its own reward. A late foreign poet, Alterman of Israel, expressed it thus: for a few, a country is a transparent excuse to cast their lives asunder. But even disregarding this, utility theory offers a straightforward answer. For utility theory deals not only in sure things, but in gambles. A utility value is assigned to lotteries, and to lotteries whose prizes are tickets to yet other lotteries. The men and women who risked their lives for liberty were in effect buying a ticket to a lottery whose possible outcome included life or death with different probabilities. Their intense love of liberty made this type of lottery more attractive than the status quo. Liberty no longer commands quite so high a price to maintain, but maintaining it is by no means free. Whether you accumulate weapons and spend time and effort on vigilance, or farm the task of internal security to police and that of external security to armed forces, you foot the bill. Liberty is somewhat like an automobile. There's a significant purchase price, and in the case of liberty, financing is not available. Not exactly true, because there was some lending involved, say, in the founding of the United States. And that money was never returned, by the way. Once you own the vehicle, maintenance costs are moderate initially. But as the contraption ages, maintenance costs rise, and eventually you have to buy it all over again, or else junk it and buy another. Liberty, too, tends to get worn away in bureaucracy and red tape. The main point being made is that liberty commands a price. Whether it is obtained by a liberty or death-style insurrection or by docile political activism, the price must be paid or the goods are not obtained. So now that we've established that, we go on to the limited domain. Having both value and price, liberty is a commodity. It is now time to accept some of the consequences of this insight. The most obvious corollary is that liberty cannot be available in unlimited quantities. A politician who promises X chickens in every pot or Y cars in every garage is engaging in wishful thinking unless he considers the economics of raising all these chickens and manufacturing all those automobiles. Similarly, whoever offers liberty and justice must consider the mechanics of securing and maintaining these elusive commodities. In particular, the goal of liberty and justice for all is an impossibility. It never was for all and cannot be. Ancient Athens instituted democracy, but it did not extend to slaves. The USA declared in 1776 that all men were created equally. This definitely did not include women. It also did not extend to men of African or Native American extraction. Okay. Every culture known draws a line within which privilege and responsibility rest and beyond which they don't apply. The select group may bear different names: nobility, master race, citizens, men, folk, the people. The rationale for its definition may not be voiced or may be mystical in nature. Still, the line is there, as it must be. Liberty must be spread wide enough so as to assure a base of adherents sufficient to secure and maintain it. It must not be spread so thin as to dilute it into nothing. Even if liberty were extended to all humans, the arbitrary line is still there. For what of other species? Is a master species any more justified than a master race? Explanations to the effect that other species lack immortal souls or that humans are appointed by divine authority to rule over other species don't hold any more water than other mystical explanations. Some species, such as the great apes, could live within a human-like social system. And he talks about cocoa. I'm not going to go into that. Dogs and cats might be able to use some rights and respect some duties, but extending rights to and securing mutual respect of same from sharks, mosquitoes, or AIDS viruses is impossible. Humans can limit their diets and avoid consuming other animals. Some do so out of humanitarian considerations, but not all animals could accept such restrictions and survive. Snakes and tigers, to name just two, could not. And even humans, if they extended the line to avoid consuming any organism, whatever, would quickly find themselves out of business. The order of nature is consumption and exploitation of one creature by another. Liberty and justice can create a domain within which competition is limited to civilized intercourse. Such domain is artificially and arbitrarily defined. If you find yourself or others with whom you identify excluded, then you have no obligation to respect that social regime. You may rebel and try to establish a different order with a different domain. But the dividing line, defining the domain in which liberty and justice apply, must still be there. Okay, so let's go back now to Nassim Taleb, having made that distinction.
So I'm not arguing in favor of a top-down control. I'm arguing in favor of a bottom-up control. See, of a bottom-up restriction or freedom, just a bottom-up thing. Like, for example, for a long time, the Swiss did not allow foreigners to come by houses. Okay, now you may think it's very offensive to someone who believes in free trade, but they thought that given that they have great weather and a great political system, and hence a lot of stability, it does attract a lot of rich people who are going to come in and distort prices. So some cantons allowed, okay, the foreigners. Some places like Zug love foreigners. Some places like Gstaad, I think, they like foreigners, but other places don't like foreigners. You see, they don't want, not because they don't like foreigners, but because they feel that people coming in from Saudi Arabia or Russia or some billionaires got to come in and mess up the social structure. You see. Now, are you for or against such a thing? It's a club. So the whole thing is, when I read Ostrom, prompted by your discussion with Peter Betke, I went and saw the word club, and effectively, my behavior inside of Club Lounge at JFK is different from the one I have outside of Club Lounge. Automatically, I know that in a club, for example, inside if I'm not in a public area, okay, or in a club, it's neither public nor private. Okay, I leave my stuff. I leave my computer on the table, and go get my pastis. Okay, and come back with my pastis. So I trust the other people in the club in a limited way, of course. But there's something I will never get in an open space with other people. So it's just these small little things that turning something into a club, and the club has its rules. Letting goods in, letting people in, and usually there is a very good governance at that level. And this is what you and I will agree on, is that there is governance. If people have the right to decide that all houses need to be painted red in their neighborhood, if that's what they want, you see?
Okay, so let me see if I should come back and talk to you for a bit. I may be out of business here. So let me just well, let me just, I'm going to assume that I'm here and that I can see myself. In fact, I am going to look at what's going on through here. Currently live. I can sort of see myself. And I think if I do this, then it will probably work. Currently live. I can sort of see myself. And I think if I do this, then it will probably work. Okay. So what Nassim Taleb just said is it has to be a club. The club in which whatever liberty you're going to have is enforced. It has to be a limited number of people. And that's really not all that different from what my father said in his article on liberty and justice. So in order to maintain liberty, it can't be for everyone. It has to be more limited than that. And unfortunately, the group that defends the club, I mean, the club members should defend their own club. And if they are unable or unwilling so to do, then the club rules will not be enforced. So when was the last time that, say, the states in the United States defended their right to be the state? When was the last time any of that happened? So that is the problem. You have to have a unit that's small enough so that it has coherent control over the rights that it wants to maintain. But if it's that small, how can it defend itself against all the others? In the United States, the deal was supposed to be that each of the states agrees that every other state is a sovereign state. But didn't we give up on that in the 19th century? How do we go back? And as libertarians, are we a stubborn minority who is winning or a stubborn minority that is losing? If we're losing, maybe we should put up the barricades and not let other people join our ranks. Only if we're winning will proselytizing actually work in our favor. So I'm going to sign off with that.